The first secret to thinking in English instinctively. Train your brain and stop translating. You've spent years studying English. You've learned the grammar rules. You've memorized the vocabulary. You've watched videos, taken notes, and even practiced speaking. But still, every time you try to talk, something blocks you. You hear the question. You understand the words. But before you speak, your mind starts translating. From Portuguese to English, word by word, one sentence at a time. And by the time you say something, the moment is gone. The conversation has moved on. The connection is broken. Again, this is the silent struggle of millions of learners. You know the words, you know the rules, but you don't think in English. And without that, fluency feels like a distant dream. Now imagine something different. You're in a conversation. The person asks a question. You don't translate, you respond. Naturally, instinctively. You feel the rhythm. You choose your words without thinking. You're not perfect, but you're present. The words flow. The fear disappears. This is what it means to speak English instinctively. And there's a reason fluent speakers get there while others stay stuck. It's not because they're smarter. It's not because they lived abroad. It's not luck. It's because they unlocked something most learners never even think about. A hidden process. A shift inside the brain. A secret that changes the way English lives in your mind. In this video, we're going to reveal that secret. You'll understand why translation is not only slowing you down, it's training your brain to stay stuck. You'll discover how your brain actually learns language and how to train it to think directly in English. No mental middleman. No frozen pauses. Just pure connection. We'll break down how native teachers silently reprogram their students to speak naturally, the exercises they use, the way they create fluency without ever saying the word fluency. You'll see the science, the psychology, and most importantly, the shift that finally lets English become automatic. This isn't about hacks. This is about transformation. If you've ever felt like you're almost fluent, but something invisible is holding you back, this video will show you what that something is and how to remove it from your path. You don't need more words. You need a new way of thinking. And that begins right now. The invisible wall. Why translation keeps you trapped. You open your mouth to speak English, and before anything comes out, your brain lights up in Portuguese. You know what you want to say, but instead of just saying it, you start the process. First, build the sentence in your native language. Then search for the equivalent words in English. Then check the grammar. Then adjust the word order. Then finally speak. What was supposed to be communication becomes calculation. You're no longer talking, you're translating. This is the invisible wall. You don't see it, but you feel it every time you hesitate, every time you lose your train of thought. Every time your speech feels unnatural, robotic, or too slow. Most learners never question this process. They assume it's normal. Of course I have to translate. I don't know English that well yet. But what if that habit is the very thing preventing you from knowing English that well? What if translation isn't a bridge, but a cage? Because here's the truth. You cannot be fluent in a language you don't think in. And as long as you're translating, you're not thinking in English. You're thinking in your native language about English. That subtle difference is everything. Let's break it down. When you translate, you're operating in serial mode. Step by step. Line by line. You think of a sentence, break it into pieces, and rebuild it in a new language. It's slow, it's stressful, and it breaks the natural rhythm of conversation. Meanwhile, fluent speakers are operating in parallel mode. They're not translating. They're processing ideas directly into language. They hear a question, and the answer comes, not because they're reciting memorized lines, but because they're used to thinking in the language itself. The result? Their English flows. Yours hesitates. Not because of intelligence, not because of grammar knowledge, but because of mental process. Now ask yourself this: where did you learn to translate? You weren't born doing it. Children don't translate when they learn their first language. They absorb, they mimic, they play. Translation is not natural. It's taught. In school, in textbooks, in traditional classes that treat English like math. Rules to memorize, formulas to apply. So you build this habit. You see a sentence in English. You ask, how do I say that in Portuguese? You hear a word. You run it through a mental dictionary. You see a verb tense. You pause to decode it. Over time, your brain gets really good at translation, and worse, at fluency. You trained yourself to stay stuck. Here's the paradox. The better you get at translating, the harder it becomes to think directly in English. You're reinforcing a pathway that keeps fluency out of reach. Like building a bridge that only leads you back to where you started. And yet so many learners cling to this method. Why? Because translation feels safe. It gives you control. It makes you feel like you understand. But safety is not fluency. Comfort is not confidence. And control is not flow. Fluency is messy. It's emotional. It's alive. And that's why fluent speakers sound natural even when they make mistakes. Because their mind isn't trying to be perfect. It's trying to connect. And that connection comes from thinking directly in English, not about English. So how do you break the translation habit? You can't force it. You can't just tell your brain to stop. That never works. What you need is a new environment, a system of practice that removes the need to translate in the first place. A way to rewire the brain by replacing the habit, not resisting it. That's exactly what native teachers do. Not with complex grammar charts, not with long vocabulary lists, but with carefully designed training that builds mental reflexes. Reflexes that bypass your native language and go straight to English. In the next chapter, you'll see how this works. You'll understand why rhythm is the brain's secret language processor, why native speakers never study with translations, and why the most fluent learners stop translating long before they ever became advanced. Translation feels like a tool. In reality, it's a trap. And once you see that, you can begin to escape it. The rhythm pathway. How the brain processes English differently. Language is not just information. It's music. It moves, pulses, stretches, contracts. It has rhythm. And the rhythm of English is unlike the rhythm of Portuguese, Spanish, or any other language. This difference is not a minor detail. It is the hidden highway that fluent speakers drive on, and the dirt road where learners get stuck. You see, when native teachers train students to speak instinctively, they rarely start with grammar. They start with sound, with flow, with timing. They know that your brain doesn't just memorize vocabulary, it tracks patterns. And the most important pattern in any language isn't the words, it's the rhythm those words create. Let's compare. In Portuguese, the stress is more evenly spread. Syllables are more stable. You tend to pronounce what you see. In English, the opposite happens. Time is uneven. Stressed words are loud and stretched. Unstressed words shrink, disappear, or blend together. What are you doing becomes, what you doing? I don't know becomes, I don't know. The words change shape depending on their role in the sentence. To a learner who focuses on translation, this sounds like a mess. But to the fluent brain, it's music. And music is not read word by word. It's felt. This is the rhythm pathway. It's the unconscious track your brain builds when it hears English as sound, not as text. It's how babies learn to speak. First by absorbing melody, tone, stress, and emotion, long before they understand grammar. Native teachers recreate this pathway in the classroom. They train your brain to feel the beat of English before you try to speak it. Because once you feel the rhythm, the words follow. Not the other way around. Think of your favorite song. You may not understand every lyric, but the rhythm helps you follow. You predict the next sound. You know when to pause, when to rise, when to fall. English works the same way. Fluent speakers ride the rhythm. Learners who translate break it. Why? Because translation is linear. It builds sentences like puzzles. But English rhythm is dynamic. It flows in chunks. It's not word, word, word. It's idea, image, phrase. You don't say, I am going to go to the store, one piece at a time. You say it as one unit. I'm going to go to the store. That chunk lives in the rhythm. And the brain recognizes chunks faster than isolated words. Now here's the problem. Most learners never train their ear to hear these chunks. They see English as subtitles, blocks of text. They expect every word to be pronounced clearly and separately. But that's not how English works. So they listen and get lost. They speak and sound robotic. Not because they lack vocabulary, but because they lack rhythm. This is why some learners speak English fluently with only 500 words, while others sound unnatural with thousands. Rhythm makes the difference. It creates trust, confidence, natural flow. It tells the listener, this person thinks in English. So how do native teachers build this rhythm? They use shadowing. You hear a phrase and immediately repeat it, copying the intonation and speed. You don't stop to analyze. You react. This builds a neural link between sound and speech. Over time, your brain begins to anticipate the next beat, just like in music. They use back-chaining, starting from the end of a phrase and moving backward. To the store, go to the store, gonna go to the store. This teaches your tongue to move with natural flow instead of halting through each word. They use drilling in context, not isolated phrases, but full situations. You're not repeating, I'm fine, thank you. You're responding in a conversation about your weekend, your plans, your memories. Rhythm has meaning when it's alive, and they do something else. They remove your native language from the process. No translations, no side-by-side comparisons. Just repetition, immersion, and pattern recognition. The rhythm pathway is not built through effort. It's built through exposure. Your brain learns to expect how a sentence should sound. And once you expect it, you begin to produce it, instinctively. That's what fluent speakers do. They don't calculate. They flow. But rhythm isn't just about speaking. It's about listening too. Because once you catch the rhythm, native speech stops feeling fast. It starts feeling predictable. You begin to notice that did you becomes didja, that want to becomes wanna, that let me becomes lemme. You stop chasing the dictionary and start following the beat. When rhythm becomes your compass, fluency stops being about what you know and starts being about what you feel. That's the moment your brain switches from translating to processing. That's when English stops being a second language and becomes your other voice. But rhythm alone is not enough. It needs something to hold it together. A structure, a space where your brain can practice in real situations. That's where native teachers introduce the second layer of instinctive fluency. Real-world context. Real-world triggers. Practicing English in the brain's natural environment. If rhythm is the invisible thread that carries language forward, then real-world context is the fabric that gives it shape, meaning, and emotional weight. Native teachers understand something that many learners overlook. You don't truly learn a language by studying it. You learn it by using it. And the way you use it must mirror how your brain is wired to acquire it. The brain doesn't learn through theory. It learns through need. This is why the classroom alone is never enough. It's not that the classroom is wrong. It's that the brain needs to connect language to life. Grammar rules, vocabulary drills, textbook phrases, they all feel abstract, disconnected, sterile. The brain treats them like data, But when you place those same phrases inside a real moment, a decision, a feeling, a memory, they become human. And what is remembered emotionally is remembered permanently. Native teachers recreate that human connection. From day one, they take English off the page and place it inside situations. You're not studying how to use the present perfect. You're explaining a trip you took last summer. You're not memorizing shopping vocabulary. You're pretending to order your favorite coffee at a noisy cafe. You're not rehearsing polite expressions. You're calming down an angry customer in a role-play exercise. These aren't lessons, they're experiences. And experience changes the brain. Here's why that works. Language is stored in your memory in layers. At the surface, there are isolated facts, words, definitions, rules. These are easy to forget, especially under pressure. Deeper than that, you have episodic memory, experiences that combine sound, context, emotion, and movement. When you practice English inside a real-world simulation, the words you use become part of that experience. They link to feelings, visuals, decisions, even body language. And the brain doesn't forget experiences. It recalls the whole moment. That's why when you smell a certain food, you suddenly remember a childhood memory in full detail. Language can do the same, if it's linked to something real. That's what native teachers are doing. They're not just teaching, they're creating triggers, real-world triggers, the kind of mental shortcuts that help your brain say, "Oh, I know how to respond here. I've done this before." You might not have taken a flight in real life, but if you've practiced checking in at an airport 20 times in class, you'll handle it smoothly when the moment comes. You might not have met a tourist yet, but if you've rehearsed giving directions 10 times, your brain will find the words when it matters. It's not about performance, it's about preparation. Repetition in context is what builds readiness, and readiness is the root of fluency. But real-world triggers go beyond role plays. They also show up in daily habits, small routines that shift English from being something you study to something you live. Native teachers encourage their students to turn ordinary moments into language labs, talking to yourself while doing dishes, narrating your day while walking, listening to English while shopping, writing short journal entries about your day. These are not random activities. They are brain-aligned triggers. Your environment becomes your teacher. And there's another layer to context: unpredictability. The real world doesn't follow scripts. It surprises you. It interrupts you. It forces you to adapt. Native teachers simulate this chaos deliberately. In one moment, you're role-playing as a waiter. Suddenly, the customer starts complaining. You didn't prepare for that. Now you must improvise. In another exercise, you're describing a photo. The teacher asks a personal question about it. You freeze for a second, then speak. These micro moments of pressure teach your brain to respond, not prepare. That's the instinct fluency is made of. Because in real life, you won't be given time to translate. You won't pause for grammar. You won't search a dictionary. You'll need to act. Native teachers force that action in safe settings so that when the real world demands it, your mind and tongue are already trained. This method also builds emotional tolerance. In a textbook, everything is clean. In life, things are messy. You forget words. You get interrupted. You get nervous. That's not failure, that's reality. Native teachers normalize it. They make space for hesitation, for mistakes, for awkward pauses. Not as problems, but as practice. Fluency is not the absence of discomfort. It's your ability to keep speaking through it. And here's the powerful truth. Once you've practiced English in enough unpredictable, meaningful emotional situations, your brain stops asking, "How do I say this?" and starts saying it. That's the moment you stop needing translations. Not because you memorized enough words, but because you've lived enough English. It becomes your second skin, your alternate self, your other voice. But to make this shift permanent, context must go deeper than role plays and habits. It must begin to rewire how your brain processes language. That requires understanding the architecture of your mind and how to train it like a fluent speaker does. That's where we go next. Rewiring the brain, how fluent speakers process language differently. You've been taught that fluency is about knowledge. The more vocabulary you learn, the more grammar you master, the more fluent you become. But that's only half the story, and in many ways, the least important half. Because while knowledge matters, it's not what produces fluent speech. What produces fluency is how your brain retrieves and uses that knowledge under pressure. Fluent speakers don't translate. They don't pause to recall grammar charts. They don't mentally scan a list of synonyms before speaking. They speak with flow, even when their vocabulary isn't perfect. Why? Because their brains are wired differently. They've trained their minds to operate in English, not to think about English. And that difference is everything. Let's take a closer look. Your brain learns through pathways. When you study a new word, it creates a connection. When you hear it again, the connection strengthens. When you use it in a sentence, the connection multiplies. But here's the problem. If you learn that word by translating it from your native language, your brain wires it into a dependent loop. That word only lives in your memory when connected to its translation. You don't actually own the word. You borrow it from your first language every time you need it. Now imagine learning that same word by hearing it in context. No translation. Just sound, meaning, tone. You hear it used in a story. You hear it repeated in a conversation. You mimic it during a role play. Your brain links the word directly to its function, not its definition. That's a new pathway. That's ownership. Fluent speakers have thousands of these direct pathways. They've trained their brains to move straight from idea, phrase, expression, without stopping at the translation station. This is what native teachers help learners develop. Not more knowledge, faster access to what they already know. But there's another layer. Fluent speakers use chunks, not individual words. They don't build sentences like Legos. They grab ready-made pieces of language. I was just about to... You know what I mean? As far as I know? These phrases are stored in the brain as single units, not separate parts. Like a pianist who doesn't think of each note. They think in patterns, in movements. When you build these patterns into your speaking, your brain has less to process, less to calculate. It can focus on delivery, not construction. That's how fluency feels effortless, because it is. The effort happened before, during practice, during rewiring. And here's the neuroscience behind it. The brain stores language in two systems. The declarative system, facts, rules, things you study, and the procedural system, skills, habits, things you do. Traditional study loads your declarative memory. Fluent speakers, however, rely on their procedural memory. It's the difference between knowing how to drive a car and actually driving it. Native teachers aim all their training at the procedural system. Repetition, rhythm, context, emotion, mistakes, correction. All of these form habits, not just memories. Speaking becomes a reflex, not a decision. That's why fluent speakers don't try to speak English. They just do it, because their brains have been trained, not just informed. Now let's talk about mistakes. Learners fear them. Fluent speakers use them. When you speak and make a mistake, and someone corrects you, your brain lights up. It forms a stronger memory than if you had said it right the first time. That's called error-driven learning. Native teachers know this. They create environments where mistakes are expected, even encouraged. Because every mistake is a data point, a chance to recalibrate the system. Fluent speakers make thousands of small mistakes, but they move through them, not away from them. Each one refines their rhythm, tightens their flow, sharpens their expression. Over time, their speech becomes more precise, not because they focused on being perfect, but because they focused on consistency. Another key to rewiring is speed under pressure. In real conversation, you don't have time to think slowly. Native teachers simulate that pressure in class. Timed responses, real-time improvisation, fast-paced questions. These exercises don't just test what you know. They train the brain to retrieve faster, to operate in English even when the mind is stressed. That's the core of instinctive fluency. And the most overlooked tool of all? Silence. Fluent speakers don't fear silence. They use it. A pause is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of processing. Native teachers teach their students to pause naturally, not anxiously. To hold space with calmness, not panic. This rewires the brain to stay grounded even when unsure. Fluency is not speaking fast. It's speaking with control. So if your goal is to think in English instinctively, you must train your brain the way fluent speakers do. Stop feeding translation loops. Build chunks through repetition in rhythm. Practice in real-world context. Welcome feedback, correction, and pressure. Target your procedural memory, not just declarative knowledge. When your brain no longer needs to think about English but starts to live in English, the change is permanent. You no longer speak from the outside in. You speak from the inside out. And that is the definition of fluency. But rewiring the brain requires structure. And structure only works if it's built into your daily life. That's what fluent speakers and native teachers understand better than anyone. That fluency is not an event. It's a lifestyle. And it's time to build it. The Fluency Lifestyle. How to build English into your day without even thinking. What separates someone who studies English for years from someone who actually speaks it fluently? The answer isn't just knowledge or practice or even confidence. It's environment. Fluent speakers don't just practice English, they live inside it. English is not an activity they do. It's the atmosphere they breathe. The real difference is not time spent studying. It's the way that language becomes part of their daily identity. Fluency is not built in big, dramatic moments. It's built in small, invisible ones, quiet routines repeated consistently until English becomes automatic. And native teachers know this. That's why they teach students to stop separating language from life. Instead, they show them how to embed English into the spaces that already exist in their day. Start small. Morning habits are powerful. The moment you wake up, your brain is most receptive. It's transitioning from dream logic into conscious attention. Native teachers often ask students to narrate their morning in English. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just small things. I'm getting up, I'm brushing my teeth, I need coffee. This is not childish. This is fluency training. You're shifting your inner voice. And that inner voice matters. A lot. We all talk to ourselves, silently, constantly. We plan, judge, imagine, rehearse. Fluent speakers train that inner voice to operate in English. At first it feels artificial, then it feels familiar, then it becomes default. You think in English not because you force it, but because your mind has made it a habit. Throughout the day, these micro moments are everywhere. You're walking to the store. You're waiting in line. You're cooking dinner. Each one is a chance to bring English in, not as a task, but as a natural layer of your routine. Instead of scrolling mindlessly on your phone, you watch a short video in English. Instead of reading the news in your native language, you try the English version. You swap one language exposure for another, little by little. This builds immersion without even needing to leave your country. Listening becomes a ritual. Not in the background, not passive, but focused, short sessions. A podcast during your commute. A movie scene during lunch. 10 minutes of a shadowing exercise before bed. These rituals become anchors in your day. They send your brain a message. This is who I am. I live in English now. One powerful habit is labeling your world. Every object, every action, give it a name in English. You walk into your room, say it. Chair, bed, window, backpack. You start preparing food. Say it. Slice the tomato. Turn on the stove. Boil the water. These may seem like childish games, but your brain doesn't care about dignity. It cares about repetition, about connection, about reinforcement. You're not being silly. You're building circuits. Another key practice, micro-journaling. Just 1 or 2 sentences every day. Today was hard. I felt tired. I had fun with my friends. I learned a new phrase. It's not worth it. You don't need a novel. You need momentum. When you write, you slow down your thoughts. You clarify your ideas. You give English structure. Over time, those short reflections become a record of progress. You'll read back and say, I couldn't have written this a month ago. That feedback is fuel. Now here's the secret to making these routines stick. Personal connection. Don't just study English as a language. Link it to what you already love. If you enjoy fitness, follow fitness coaches who speak English. If you love gaming, watch English-speaking gamers. If you're into productivity, find YouTubers, podcasts, or communities in English that match that passion. The more personal the content, the deeper the engagement. Your brain learns faster when it cares. Fluent speakers don't practice English for the sake of English. They use it as a tool to experience the world. That's why it sticks. The language becomes part of who they are, not a subject, a lens, a filter on life. This shift also affects your identity. When you start living in English, something happens internally. You begin to see yourself not just as a learner, but as a user. You're not just trying to speak English, you already are. That subtle shift transforms your confidence. You speak not to impress, but to express. You don't need permission. You give it to yourself. This is the fluency lifestyle. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. Living each day with English close to you, in your thoughts, in your environment, in your expression. Bit by bit, the gap between who you are in your native language and who you are in English disappears. And that's when fluency stops being a goal. It becomes your new normal. But for that to happen, the brain needs a trigger, a reason to keep choosing English every day. And that reason is often not found in language apps or grammar books. It's found in emotion, in psychology, in identity, in the moment when you finally stop fearing mistakes and begin using English to connect, not to impress. That mindset shift is what we'll explore next. The mindset flip. From fearful student to confident speaker. You can know all the words. You can understand every rule. You can even pass every test. But none of that guarantees fluency. Because fluency doesn't live in knowledge. It lives in permission. The permission to speak before you feel ready. The permission to be imperfect and still communicate. The permission to use English as your own voice, not just as a subject you're trying to pass. This is the mindset shift fluent speakers have made, and most learners haven't. It starts with a belief, deep, quiet, often hidden. I don't speak well enough yet. That belief builds a wall. You wait, you prepare, you delay. You translate everything in your head because you're afraid of saying the wrong thing. You feel embarrassed, even ashamed, when you hesitate. You compare yourself to others. You worry that people will judge your accent, your grammar, your pauses, and so you study more. You repeat the cycle. You chase fluency, but you never own it. Because secretly, you still believe you're not the kind of person who speaks English. This is the real problem. Not lack of ability, not lack of intelligence, not even lack of opportunity. It's the identity you've accepted. Native teachers know this. That's why they don't just correct mistakes, they work on confidence. They understand that language is emotional. It's vulnerable. When you speak in another language, you expose yourself. You're not just saying words. You're revealing how much you know, how much you don't know, how much you feel like you don't know. Fluent speakers speak because they've stopped asking for permission. They don't wait until they're ready. They start now, with mistakes, with doubt, with limited vocabulary. Because they know, fluency doesn't come before confidence. Confidence comes before fluency. This is what native teachers train. The willingness to speak before it feels safe. One way they do this is by creating low-pressure environments. Role plays, pair activities, short answers, games. They create space for speaking without judgment. You're not being tested. You're being activated. And slowly you begin to notice. I spoke. It wasn't perfect, but I survived. That moment rewires something in you. From that point on, every small success builds new evidence. You can do this. Here's something powerful. Every time you speak English, even if it's broken, your brain gains data. It learns that communication is possible, that perfection is optional, that progress comes from doing, not waiting. This mindset unlocks fluency not through grammar, but through action. Fluent speakers don't fear mistakes. They expect them. They even use them. Every time they forget a word or say the wrong tense, they don't panic. They adapt. They find a new way to say the same thing. They negotiate meaning. They keep the conversation alive. This resilience isn't natural. It's trained. Native teachers coach it through redirection, repetition, and encouragement. They never say, "You're wrong." They say, "Try again." And that simple invitation keeps learners engaged rather than ashamed. Now think about how you respond when you're corrected. Do you shut down? Or do you lean in? The mindset of a confident speaker is not, "I never make mistakes." It's, "I grow from every one of them." That growth builds a psychological muscle. A new belief begins to form. English is not something I'm learning. It's something I live inside. That belief creates freedom. Here's the paradox. The less you care about being perfect, the faster you become fluent. Why? Because your brain stops hesitating. It starts experimenting. And in language, experimentation is everything. It's how children learn. It's how comedians master timing. It's how speakers find their rhythm. You must allow your English to evolve in real time, not in isolation, but in use. Another element of the mindset flip is ownership. Stop thinking of English as something that belongs to native speakers. It belongs to you too. You are not borrowing a language. You are building a voice. And that voice doesn't need to be flawless. It needs to be authentic. Once you make that shift, everything changes. You stop translating. You stop freezing. You stop apologizing. You begin to speak from your own experience. With the words you know, in the rhythm you've learned. You show up as yourself, just in another language. And that's what real fluency is. Not perfection, not imitation, not memorization. It's presence. It's the ability to express what you think, feel, and want, even if you say it simply. Even if you say it differently than a native speaker would. What matters is that you say it. This mindset flip doesn't happen instantly, but it begins the moment you stop trying to deserve fluency and start living as if you already own it. The learners who make this shift unlock fluency faster, not because they're better, but because they're braver. But there's one more element that amplifies all of this. The final piece of instinctive fluency: immersion. Not just the environment around you, but the identity within you. And that's exactly where we're going next. Immersion from the inside out. Becoming the kind of person who speaks English. When people hear the word immersion, they think of travel, of living abroad. of being dropped into an English-speaking country and learning by necessity. And yes, that's one kind of immersion. It's powerful. It works, but it's not the only way. Because true immersion doesn't begin with geography. It begins with identity. Fluent speakers don't just live around English, they live in it. English becomes the voice in their head, the tone of their thoughts, the rhythm of their emotions. They see the world through English, not because they were born with it, but because they trained their inner environment to match the outer one. And native teachers know this. That's why they don't just focus on what you do. They help you shift how you see yourself. The real question isn't, how do I get fluent? The real question is, who do I become in order to speak English fluently? Because language is not a tool you use. It's a space you inhabit. It's an extension of your personality. And when you live in your native language, that personality is effortless. But when you switch to English, if it feels like you're putting on a mask, something's wrong. You're still learning from the outside in. You're memorizing words. You're thinking about grammar. You're calculating before speaking. You haven't crossed the line yet. Immersion from the inside out begins when English stops being the language you're learning and becomes the language you think in when you feel most alive. So how do you reach that point? Start with the micro choices, the decisions you make every day about how you experience the world. You open your phone. What language are your apps in? You go on YouTube. Do you choose videos in English or in your native language? You listen to music. Are the lyrics part of your learning? You think to yourself, what language are those thoughts in? Each of those is a fork in the road. Every time you choose English, you feed your new identity. And identities grow through repetition. This isn't about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about expanding who you are, becoming a version of yourself who expresses, feels, reacts, and exists comfortably in English. And you don't need to wait until you're fluent to do this. That's the trap. Immersion is not a reward for fluency. It's the pathway to fluency. Here's what fluent speakers do differently. They don't wait for permission to act fluent. They practice being fluent in the small moments, every day. They don't say, I can't think in English yet. They start thinking in English even when the words are simple. They don't say, one day I'll live abroad. They bring English into their current life, right now, right where they are. This is where true immersion happens. Not in the airport, not in the classroom, but in the kitchen, on the bus, in the shower, while texting a friend, while dreaming. The goal is not to escape your current environment. It's to transform it into a place where English can thrive. And this kind of immersion is more powerful than most people realize, because it doesn't depend on location. It depends on frequency, emotion, and identity. Native teachers encourage learners to stop treating English like a project. Projects end. Fluency doesn't. English becomes a lifestyle, a filter over your day, a soundtrack beneath your actions. Imagine this version of you. You wake up, and your thoughts are already forming in English. You check your phone, and your feed is filled with creators speaking the language you want to master. You walk into the kitchen, narrating your movements in your second language. You go to work or school, and English plays quietly in your headphones, training your mind like background music. You respond to messages, journal your ideas, or talk to yourself. Naturally, not forcefully. This is you, not acting like a learner, but living like a speaker. And the brain responds. You stop hesitating. You stop searching for the right words. You begin feeling the right words. You stop translating. You start expressing. And the best part? You still make mistakes. But now those mistakes don't define you. They refine you. Because you're no longer visiting English. You live there now. Your voice in English doesn't replace your first voice. It enhances it. It adds color, dimension, possibility, a new way to see the world, and more importantly, a new way to speak into it. Immersion from the inside out is not a technique. It's a transformation. And once you enter it, there is no going back to studying English, because now you are English, just as much as you are yourself. But there's one more thing. One final idea that brings everything together. The concept that native teachers rarely say out loud, but that every fluent speaker eventually understands. You don't need permission to speak English instinctively. You only need to decide that it's yours. And that's where we'll end. Fluency is a decision, claiming English as your own. You've learned the grammar. You've repeated the phrases. You've made the flashcards, watched the videos, and practiced speaking out loud. You've done what learners are told to do. But after all that effort, one question still haunts you. Why don't I feel fluent yet? The answer isn't found in a method. It's not in the next app, or textbook, or trick. It's in a moment where you stop seeing English as a challenge and start seeing it as part of who you are. Because here's the truth that no one tells you. Fluency isn't something that happens to you. It's something you decide. You decide to stop translating. You decide to start speaking, even when you don't feel ready. You decide to think in English, even when it's hard. You decide to keep showing up again and again until fluency isn't just a goal. It's your default. That decision doesn't come from confidence. It creates confidence. It doesn't mean you won't make mistakes. You will. It doesn't mean your grammar will be perfect. It won't. But it means you stop waiting for permission to sound like a fluent speaker, and you start living like one. Because you already know enough. Enough words to communicate. Enough grammar to express yourself. Enough rhythm to connect. You've crossed every stage. You've seen how translation slows you down. You've learned how rhythm rewires your brain. You've trained your speech through daily rituals. You've broken the fear with confident mindset shifts. You've built immersion from the inside out. Now there's only one thing left to do. Own it. Speak, not to impress, but to connect. Think, not to translate, but to express. Listen, not to decode, but to feel. Language is not about getting it right. It's about getting it out and letting it be yours. The learners who become fluent fastest are not the ones who know the most. They're the ones who decide they're fluent and then act like it every single day. Even when it's messy, even when it's hard, even when no one understands them the first time. They don't quit. They don't apologize. They don't shrink. They speak again, and again, and again, until the world starts to listen, until they start to believe the voice they've been building is real. Because it is. You don't need to pass a test to claim fluency. You need to stand inside your English and say, "This is mine." That decision changes everything. It rewires your brain. It shifts your identity. It creates momentum where there used to be hesitation. And from that moment on, you are no longer chasing fluency. You are living it.